Imagine lying perfectly still while sacred oils are poured over your trembling body. Imagine feeling linen strips wrapped tighter and tighter around your limbs, your chest, your throat, as voices chant prayers for your soul while your heart still beats. Imagine knowing that the men performing this ritual, calling it purification, are sealing you inside your own tomb while breath still moves through your lungs. This is not fiction. This is not myth. This happened to a young woman named Nefret in ancient Thebes, and her story is one of the most disturbing examples of faith twisted into cruelty that history has ever preserved. The year is 1230 before Christ. The dying sun bleeds across the horizon, casting long shadows through the colossal pillars of Karnak temple. Inside its sacred halls, the air hangs thick with incense and resin. Smoke curling through corridors painted with gods whose painted eyes seem to watch everything. Torches flicker against the walls, their lights trembling like a frightened heartbeat in the temple's deepest chamber. Hidden from the festival celebrations echoing along the Nile outside, a young girl named Nefret lies on cold stone. Her body trembles beneath the linen strips that bind her limbs. The voices around her chant without mercy, rhythmic and relentless. The scent of oil and blood mingles in the suffocating air. Outside, the city celebrates life. Inside, a daughter of Egypt's most powerful priest is being mummified alive. Her crime so terrible in the eyes of the gods that death itself must come slowly, deliberately, wrapped in ritual and prayer. Neferet's life had begun beneath these same ancient stones. Her first cry had echoed between pillars older than living memory, heard only by priests and the silent stone faces of gods. Her father, Reotep, was the high priest of Ammon, a man whose word could move armies and silence kings. To the people of Thebes, he was the voice of the divine, but to Nefret he was something else entirely. He was the architect of her cage. From the moment she could understand speech, she was told she was chosen, marked by the gods as sacred, untouchable, pure. Before she learned to laugh freely, she learned to kneel. Before she saw her own reflection in still water, she had memorized prayers to a god she would serve but never truly know. Temple women dressed her in the finest linen, brushed her hair with fragrant oils, and whispered the same words over and over until they became the rhythm of her existence. You are chosen. You are the bride of the god, untouched, unbound, eternal. To the priests, her innocence was sacred. To Nefret, it was a prison without bars. Beyond the temple walls, Thebes pulsed with life and color. The streets sang with merchants hawking spices and silk, with dancers moving to drums that echoed off mud brick walls, with children racing through dust that glowed red beneath the setting sun. From her narrow chamber window, Nefret would press her face against the lattice and watch them, watch life happening to people who were free to touch, to love, to make mistakes and be forgiven. She envied them with an ache that grew deeper every year. Her only companions were the silence of statues and the echo of her own heartbeat in empty corridors. She lived surrounded by people but utterly alone, a living offering displayed in robes of white. Then came the festival of Opet, when the sacred bark of almond drifted through the city carried by priests in gold and white while thousands chanted praises to the hidden god. From her concealed balcony, Nefret watched the procession pass below, the air alive with celebration. That's when she saw him, a young scribe, his hands stained with ink, his eyes bright with a kind of curiosity that comes from reading about worlds beyond your own. His name was Kimu. As the priests passed, he bowed respectfully, but his gaze lifted for just a moment and met hers. It should have meant nothing, a glance, a second, but to Nefret, isolated for so long, that single moment cracked the walls of her world. That night, as moonlight spilled through the pillars and painted silver patterns on the floor, she lay awake hearing a voice her heart invented, gentle and human. For the first time in her life, she dared to wonder if the gods she served truly demanded purity, or if they demanded only obedience. That question alone was her first sin. In the months that followed, she found excuses to leave her chamber, delivering scrolls, fetching water, walking through courtyards where the young scribe worked. Their conversations were brief, nothing more than polite exchanges about weather and festivals, but each word struck her like a revelation. Between scrolls and stolen glances, love began to grow, soft and dangerous, hidden beneath the scent of papyrus and incense. She knew it was forbidden. She knew the penalty. But love does not ask permission from gods or men. It simply grows, like water finding cracks in stone. And though neither of them knew it then, the same walls that had sheltered her since birth would soon become the walls of her tomb. The day everything changed began with silence. Her father summoned her to his private chamber, and the moment she entered she knew. His face was carved from stone, his eyes empty of the warmth she remembered from childhood. Someone had seen them. Someone had whispered. In a place where walls had ears and shadows had tongues, nothing stayed secret for long. He did not shout. He did not need to. His voice was quiet, controlled, more terrifying than any rage. You were chosen by the gods, he said, his words falling like stones into still water. You have disgraced that choice. You have disgraced me. She tried to speak, to explain, to plead, but he raised one hand and she fell silent. The gesture was not violent. It was absolute. The daughter of Ammon does not speak with men outside these walls. A daughter of Ammon does not harbor desire. You know the law. The punishment for impurity was not written in scrolls. It was written in the bones of the temple itself, in the stories whispered about girls who had broken their vows and disappeared. Neferet felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She reached out to steady herself against the wall, her fingers brushing cold stone. "Father, please," she whispered. But Roatep had already turned away. The man who had raised her, who had once held her as a child and called her his treasure, now looked at her as though she were already dead. The days that followed were darker than any night she had ever known. The temple that had once felt like home now pressed down on her like a weight she could not escape. Servants who once smiled now turned away, muttering prayers as if her presence might curse them. She had not seen Kimu since that terrible day. She did not dare speak his name, even in her thoughts, as though the gods themselves might hear. The air no longer smelled of sanctity. It reeked of fear. Her father's eyes, once warm with pride, now burned with something colder: suspicion, duty, grief wrapped in stone. He spoke to her only before witnesses, his voice formal and distant, every trace of affection erased. The silence between them hurt more than any punishment ever could. One morning, as she prepared oils for the dawn ritual, a servant girl named Izet slipped into the chamber, her hands shaking. "They say you spoke with a man beyond the gates," she whispered, not meeting Neferet's eyes. The words cut through her like a blade. "Who says this?" Neferet asked, though she already knew. "The priests gather tonight," Izet murmured, barely audible. "They say the god has been offended." Fear swept through Neferet's body, cold as the Nile in winter. The priests did not gather to forgive. They gathered to condemn. That evening she waited by the window, hoping desperately to see Kimu's face in the courtyard below. Some sign that he was safe, that this nightmare might still end. But there was only darkness and the distant echo of chanting, low and ominous, like a heartbeat from deep beneath the earth. The next day her father summoned her to the inner sanctum. The air was so thick with incense it hurt to breathe. A circle of priests stood behind him, their faces painted with ritual solemnity, expressionless as the statues that surrounded them. "You have been accused of impurity," Roatep said, and his voice was heavy but calm, the voice of a man reciting destiny rather than choosing it. "If the gods find you unworthy, they will claim you." Her heart stopped, the room tilted. "Father," she began, but he cut her off with a single word: "Do not speak. Purity is proven through silence." It was then she understood his mind was already made. Her fate was sealed. To protest was blasphemy. To resist was to invite death more painful still. Her knees weakened, tears fell soundlessly to the stone floor. The priests began to chant, their voices rising in perfect unison, and Neferet realized with horrible clarity that her life no longer belonged to her. That night, torches burned outside her door until dawn, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock her helplessness. She lay awake, listening to the endless prayers echoing through the halls, each word like a hammer striking her heart. They called it cleansing. She knew it was preparation. Servants stopped bringing food. Her chamber was guarded. The other priestesses averted their eyes as if she carried disease. Time lost all meaning. Only the slow drip of water from the ceiling reminded her she was still alive, still breathing, still able to feel fear. She tried to pray as she had been taught since childhood, but the words turned to dust on her tongue. How could gods of mercy demand her death for the crime of being human, for daring to feel what every heart feels? She thought of Kimu, his ink-stained hands, his quiet voice, the way he had looked at her as though she mattered beyond her title. Was he free? Did he know what awaited her? Or had he already been punished for the sin of loving her? The questions circled endlessly, unanswered, unbearable. At dusk on the third day, the guards came. They said nothing as they led her down corridors lit by torchlight, the scent of myrrh growing stronger with every step. When the great doors opened, she saw her father seated upon a dais, the priests of Ammon arrayed around him like statues carved from judgment itself. In front of them stood a stone basin filled with water, dark and still, the basin of truth. If she was pure, the water would remain calm. If she was guilty, it would ripple under the gaze of the divine. Neferet's knees trembled as she approached, every eye in the chamber fixed upon her. Her father's gaze did not meet hers. "You stand accused of breaking your vows," he said, his voice echoing off stone. "A daughter of Ammon must be untouched by mortal desire. Do you confess?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Neferet lifted her chin, and though her voice shook, she spoke clearly. "I have served the gods all my life. If they find fault in me, let them speak." Her courage filled the silence, but fear coiled tight in her chest as she reached toward the basin, her reflection staring back at her from the dark water, pale and trembling and alive. She waited, one heartbeat, two. The surface stayed perfectly still. Then, as if touched by an invisible hand, a single ripple spread across the water. Gasps filled the hall. "The gods have spoken," a priest declared, his voice ringing with terrible finality. "She is unclean." Roatep closed his eyes. His fingers clenched the armrest of his chair until his knuckles turned white. "May the gods forgive us both," he whispered, so quietly she almost didn't hear. Neferet did not fight as the guards dragged her away. Her tears fell silently onto the floor. absorbed by dust that had witnessed 1,000 prayers and would witness 1,000 more. As the chanting rose behind her, growing louder and more frenzied, she understood a truth that burned worse than any flame. It was not the gods who had judged her. It was men who feared their own shadows and called it faith. Men who mistook cruelty for devotion and violence for purity. And now those men would bury her alive in the name of the divine. If you're captivated by stories like this, by the hidden horrors of history that reveal uncomfortable truths about humanity, please subscribe. These aren't just tales of the past. They're mirrors reflecting what happens when power, faith, and fear collide. And Nefert's story is far from over.